mayor, and you got to serve, and we got to serve at the same time as mayors, and it's just a really wonderful phenomenon when your community puts their faith in you and tells you that they expect you to sort of lead them and create a vision for their future and take care of them. So it's just been a blessing for me. I was born and raised in Miami, and we've been able to come up with, we believe that I was the first Miami-born mayor in the history of the city. The city was incorporated in 1896, and so for me, and the first father and son as well. So it's a beautiful legacy for me to be able to follow my father's footsteps. It's beautiful for me to be able to lead the city that I was born in and that I love and that I feel intertwined with in terms of my soul. And you know, I'm now kind of I call it in the fourth quarter, because I'm in the fourth 2-year period of my 8-year term, and really in the 15th year of service. So I'm just excited about, you know, finishing my term as mayor strong, and leaving on a positive note, and leaving a city that was better off than when I got it.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So first, people don't realize how mayors actually work together in cities that are near each other. People see dysfunction in government when you're looking at Washington and Congress and Senate, but mayors, it's this sort of rare breed where partisanship actually doesn't really come so much into play these days, a little bit more with all the school issues and things of that nature. But day-to-day things of keeping cities running, mayors work together on things, and we got to work on some really cool things together in my 6 years as mayor. But you mentioned something that I wasn't going to talk about, but I can't not ask you because I think people need to hear this story. You know, as a litigator, 15 years I worked as a litigator, and I was able to litigate cases against your father, Xavier Suarez, who was also the mayor of Miami. And his story, I know his story of coming from Cuba, and you know his real success story, and it's really an American success story, running away from communism, coming here with nothing in his pocket, and really creating something. So why don't you share a little bit about your dad's story?
You know, I love telling it, because I believe that you don't know someone until you've heard their story, until you know their story. And I think you highlight another thing that I sort of now want to touch back on, is that we're all working mayors. We all have a job. We all work in the private sector. And my father was a working mayor. You were a working mayor. I'm a working mayor. And that's the way our system of government operates. And sometimes people don't understand that, but in our county, 31 out of the 34 mayors are working mayors. The other are what they call strong mayors, meaning that they're exclusively mayor. And I tried to do that when I first got elected, change the charter to a strong mayor so that I could exclusively be the mayor. The residents decided not to go in that direction. And so I continued to focus not just on being mayor.
The way it's set up, it's impossible to make a living just being mayor.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same salary that when the office was created in 1997, they set a salary. It hasn't changed since 1997. I think it was changed for a few years for another mayor, but it was returned to that level. So it's the mayor's salary is the same as it was in 1997. So I kind of jokingly took it in Bitcoin for about a year. You know, my dad's story is really wonderful. He came to this country at, I believe, 9 years old. At 12 years old. He's the 9th of 14 kids. So big Cuban family. They emigrated to Washington, D.C., where a lot of Cubans emigrated to New Jersey, Miami, or Tampa. So he grew up in the D.C. area. His dad was an academician. He was the dean of the engineering college for a university in Cuba called Villanueva University in Havana. And he went to Villanova on a presidential scholarship here. So he got full scholarship to high school, presidential scholarship to undergrad, where he studied mechanical engineering, graduated summa. And then as an encore, he got 2 graduate degrees from Harvard, an MPP JD, which is a master's in public policy, and his Juris Doctor.
When Harvard was Harvard, not what it is today.
Yeah. When it was, it was a different school. But what was interesting is, you know, it was a 4-year dual degree program, graduate degree program. So, you know, I mean, he's a brilliant guy. You know, he learned how to speak English at 12 years old, you know, got almost a perfect score on the SAT, and then you know, distinguished himself academically, and then became the first Cuban mayor of Miami. So I think he was mayor for 8 years, twice reelected in that time, and then he was a county commissioner for 8 or 9 years in the time that I've been a city commissioner and mayor. So it's been fun to be able to serve alongside of him, and also to observe him and be a witness and learn from him growing up.
Yeah, in Miami, people know the Suarez legacy. I mean, your family really is one of the strongest families, political families in Miami. And when your ascent into your mayorship, you know, everyone was sort of looking at that dynamic between father and son, and how you were going to even make your own mark. And boy, have you made your mark. So, you know, you were a presidential candidate,
Yeah.
which was pretty amazing to see a local mayor, someone I'm friends with, run for president. So I want to get into what that was like, but
Sure.
I first want to talk about last night. I mean, Iowa was, it seems like the polls actually were pretty close to right. Almost 50% for Trump, or just over 50% for Trump, 21 or so for DeSantis, Haley just behind him, and then the others in single digits, which is almost what they were saying. A little bit of a drama with the fact that they called the election with less than 1% in, which obviously tilted the scale some, and must have, but when you're talking about a 30-point difference, I'm sure it didn't change the outcome. But what are your thoughts? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it and what it was like to run against Trump and the rest of the field.
Well, I mean, in terms of yesterday, I think, as you said, it was sort of par for the course, right? It was, the big question was, were there going to be any surprises? I think, obviously, our governor put a lot of resources and time and energy into winning Iowa. He can talk about whether he thinks he overperformed or underperformed. There was some polling at the end that showed that he might come in third. So, I mean, I think people who support him say he, overperformed the last polls, and people who don't would say, well, he lost by 30 points, right?
Well, if he would have come in third, I think that would have been likely the end of his candidacy. Right?
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be hard to argue if he came in third and came a distant third in New Hampshire. I don't know how he'll do in South Carolina, when you obviously have that's a home state for Governor Haley. And Trump is still, former President Trump is still polling strongly in South Carolina. Someone told me, or I heard one of the pundits say he still had a 30-point lead in South Carolina. So, I think this will all sort of manage itself over the next week to the next month or two at most, which is what I kind of expected, right? When I got in, I think anybody who ran in this race ran because they were seeing the same thing. What were they seeing? They were seeing a polling that showed that 70% of the country seemed to not want a rematch of the 2020 election. So anybody who is thinking about leading in that vacuum is looking at that number, right? But it's also incontrovertible that the top of the ticket, in other words, those same people who are part of that same poll, were leading by large margins. So there's a bit of what I would consider like an arbitrage, right? Like there's a discrepancy between those two polling numbers. And I think the thought for anybody who ran was that if they can present another option, one that people got excited about, that would potentially reconcile that arbitrage, right? For lack of a better phraseology. In my case, I thought I was president of all the mayors in the United States, of the Conference of Mayors, which was a national role that allowed me to travel across America and across the world. I was leading a big city, which, typically mayors of big cities are not Republican, but I think we were showing that you could lead a big city with Republican values, like pro-police, like low taxes, and that you create prosperity. We have the lowest unemployment in America, had the highest wage growth in America. I think since 2019, our wage growth was, over 140% in that time period. Our tax base has grown over 100% in the 6 years that I've been mayor. It started at 40 billion and it's now over 80 billion. So, that was sort of my concept. And the other part of it for me was, people often look at Miami and they see a success story, but what I inherited in 2009 was a broken city, right? We were on the precipice of bankruptcy. Our crime levels were not what they are today. And our poverty levels were not what they're at today. So we've reduced poverty since 2000 by 50%. Homicides, which were in the 1980s at 220 homicides in Miami. So 2 out of every 3 days someone was getting killed. Last year, we came in under our 1947 low of 32. We came in at 31.
The unfortunate part about that is people make movies about the crime-ridden era of Miami, but they don't make movies about the prosperity of Miami. So it's harder to get those messages out.
It is, but I think you've seen those messages get out in national publications. You've seen the AUM that has moved here. When I say AUM, I mean assets under managed companies. We estimate roughly that $3 trillion of AUM-based companies have set up an office or moved to Miami in the last 3 years. That's $3 trillion. I mean, that's a massive amount of capital. Our venture capital pipeline grew by 500%. And then we've had victories in other things like homelessness has gone down by double digits. Like I said, crime is at a historic low. and a tremendous amount of prosperity. So to me, that, being next generation, being Hispanic, and being someone who could convert potentially cities that are blue into red, created a formula that I thought could catch fire, right? And I also think you need to have the right personality. I think in my case, I don't suffer from some of the personality issues that some of the other candidates suffer from, but I also didn't have the volume that they had, right? I didn't have the money that they have. I didn't have the big podcast or the big stations that were backing them or that were giving them airtime at the national level. I didn't have some of the campaign apparatus that they had, because that also flows with having, a big war chest. So, for me, a lot of things had to go right. They didn't at scale, and I always said, "Look, I'm the mayor of I'm gonna have a great job. I'm the mayor of a beautiful city. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I love those jobs as well. I love doing my private sector jobs, and so if I don't see a credible path forward, then I can't stay in the race. And when I didn't make the first debate, even though I was kind of led to believe that I would, I didn't see how I could get from 1% to 3%. Without the volume that is given in a debate, in a national debate where you have an opportunity to introduce yourself to the country. So that's sort of how it played out for me. And we see it's funny because it's kind of like the Super Bowl, when you make the playoffs, right? Like, or you don't make the playoffs, like only one team wins. So everybody is going to fail in this endeavor except for the person who wins. And so we just saw Vivek, who, I got to know through the campaign and even before, drop out last night. And we've got, I think Asa Hutchinson also dropped out last night. You had Doug Bergman out there as well. So, I got to meet some of these people. They're incredible people. They care about this country. They love this country. And I got to learn a lot about the country, places like New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina and Nevada.
I spent a lot of time in those states over the summer. But when we're talking about the little nuances between Haley and DeSantis and Vivek, et cetera, what seems so far with Iowa is no one can overcome what Trump has, which is somehow still 50% is a big deal, right? 50% of Iowa caucus goers pulled the tap for him or voted for him. And it's interesting because you see all these other candidates, good candidates, some of them, going out there, substantive definitely at least, and they're winning and losing against one another. I thought DeSantis coming in second was huge for him. What that means, only time will tell. And like you said, I agree. In the next week and a half, we're going to know what effect that has. But what are your feelings about it? No one was able to even touch Trump.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this, and again, I'm going to give you a microscopic example because my time in the national race was short. But microscopically, I can tell you, I ran against an incumbent in 2013, a race that I ultimately got out of. It's really hard to beat an incumbent, and Trump is in effect an incumbent, right? When you're somebody that they have a track record. Trump has a track record, right? He was already president. He had accomplishments that he can sort of point. It's hard, and when you're the young upstart, it's hard because I was that young upstart running against an older established incumbent. And it's just really hard to get people to move off, particularly when philosophically, more or less, we all think a lot of the same things. Yes, there are differences. I'm not going to sit here and tell you there isn't any policy differences. Right. But generally speaking, we're policy, we have a similar policy. So you're nuancing your way through it, and it's hard.
It's all about getting oxygen, right?
It's all about oxygen.
Press.
It is, and it's also about connecting. I think certain candidates have we all have our strengths and weaknesses, right? I have my strengths and weaknesses in terms of what I think I can do, and I think we all do. And so, when you go through this process, you learn a lot about yourself. And you learn what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. You try to reinforce your strengths. You try to work on your weaknesses. And then, of course, you learn a lot for the future, whatever that may be.
What do you think about Trump not debating? I mean, that was obviously for the public. It's obviously something that is upsetting, and you want to just see it happen. For him, strategically, it obviously worked.
Yeah, I get it. You know what I mean? I think if I were in his campaign apparatus, I'd give him the same advice. As a as a consumer of information, political information, and as a voter, I'd love to see him debate, right? I'd love to see him get up there and mix it up. But I understand the strategy, and it's actually worked, like you said. I mean, I think he, it's pretty straightforward what he was going to do. He was going to take the oxygen and he was going to divert it to a place where he controlled the oxygen, and that's essentially what he did in the last debate between Governor Haley and Governor DeSantis. He had a town hall at the same exact time. And so I kept thinking to myself, I wonder what people are watching. You know what I mean? Are they watching him? Are they watching them? And let's face it, he's an entertaining guy. Any way you look at it.
Before anything, he's an entertainer.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's what TV is about, right? TV at some level is about, you put on the channel what entertains you, what you enjoy watching. And he knows that. He's a TV guy. He came from not just the real estate world, but also, the Apprentice show and understanding how TV works, how ratings work, and I think that's been a real strength of his candidacy. I think people underestimate him also, in terms of his ability to communicate, to connect. He says things that, like, in a more simplistic way, I think sometimes, that connect very well with people than maybe others do.
Right. But look, from my perspective, I think a lot of people think that way, even if they like Trump, or if I like Trump and things he did, that it's time for something new, another battle. Like
that was part of why I ran.
The 70% you're talking about, I think we're both part of that.
No, and that's part of why I ran, right? Like, the question is, and again, I tried to do the same thing in 2013, right? Was the city ready in 2013 for the next generation? The answer was, it wasn't, but it was in 17, right? When I got elected by 85%. So me running in 13 was a stepping stone. It was a learning curve that when I ran in 17, it was a lot easier for me because I understood what it took to run. I matured more in that time. You grow, and maybe you're in a better place. I was, I think, 36 in 2013, and I was 40 in 2017. So, a few more years under your belt, and more experience, more ability to control your opposition. And I ended up having less opposition than I did when I was running against an incumbent.
From a political theater standpoint, for someone like both of us who enjoy politics and government, this week is an exciting week just to see what happens, to see how it plays out, to see how New Hampshire and South Carolina and Nevada react to what happened in Iowa. But I have a question for you about the subtext on both races.
Sure.
So there seems to be a subtext on both the Democrat and Republican side where there's a contingency potentially happening or not, right? With Trump, it seems like everyone's saying, okay, there is a possibility that he gets convicted of a crime and can't run, or something else of that nature happens that takes him out of the race. So that's why the number 2 and 3 fight ends up even having that subtext of importance. And on the Democrat side, it's the same thing. Like, is Biden even going to make it? Or is he going to make it to the race? We know he's not likely going to make it another 4 years, period, just because of age, and you could see the condition he's in. So there's that subtext of people who are out there supporting him, like Gavin Newsom and others. Are they doing it to support him or to line up for number 2? So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, interesting. On the Trump part, he can run even if he's convicted. And I mean, if you look at some of the polling last night on Fox, they talk about, his support notwithstanding potential convictions. So it's a little different than Biden, right? If Biden were to become, let's call it, more incapacitated, or to a point where he's literally not able to serve, or heaven forbid, and I'm not wishing this upon anything, but if he were to pass, that's it, right? Like, certainly it shifts at that point. In the case of Trump, he could theoretically be convicted and still serve, and nobody really knows exactly what that means, right?
Exactly.
But there is precedent for people who are in jail running for president, and I won't put the person on blast, but I had a conversation with a high-ranking member of the RNC who I just sort of asked, like, hey, how can this play out? Right? No, how can this play out? And that's what they told me. So there is precedent. So, I think certainly voters have baked in all of these possibilities, right? Like, but it will be, in terms of the general election, if Trump gets nominated and Biden is nominated, I think it will be, to your point, a subtext. I don't think it helps Biden, who his running mate is, or the vice president, assuming that he keeps her. I presume he will.
I hope he doesn't. just for sake of contingency. I mean, there's the possibility of a Kamala presidency.
Well, I mean, it depends. If you're a Republican, you kind of hope he does, because you think it makes it more, if Trump is the nominee, it makes it more likely that he will be elected, just based on the fear that she might one day take over.
But if he pulls one off and she's number 2 in the state he's in, it's even scarier than the current situation.
Oh, no doubt. There's no doubt about it. And I think, and again, I think that will be a motivating factor for voters.
What's interesting, I spoke to some people on the ground in Iowa this morning about their experience yesterday, and we're talking when they were talking to Trump voters, Trump supporters, every time they asked a question about the potential convictions or the indictments, it was part of the reason why they decided to vote again. It was sort of the opposite of what the corporate media wanted to happen.
Well, it's interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think, and I heard Kellyanne Conway talking a little bit about this, and some other of the people on television, they're talking about the fact that, the mainstream media does not understand Trump voters. They don't understand why they are where they are, and they constantly, want to sort of reframe them. And I think yesterday was an example of them, expressing themselves and saying, look, despite all these things, this is who we want. And maybe because you continue to harp on all these things, this is who we want. So it's ironic. And I think even Governor DeSantis at one point did point out the fact that the convictions have helped the former president, right? They've galvanized his supporters. They've crystallized the fact that there is, in their minds, an establishment out to get him that, that they sort of identify with that.
And everybody understands the indictments are nonsense. I mean, we're both lawyers and can read it, but even just the public can read it. Yeah. And I think there's actually a misunderstanding from the corporate media of just the Republican voter in general. They kind of put everyone in a block. Everybody's the same, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
It's interesting because last night, for the first time, I saw on both CNN and Fox sort of a recognition. It always happens on election day, right? When someone's successful, that's when they give them their due. It doesn't last that long, oftentimes. Sometimes it just lasts that one night. But they give them their due for that one night. And then, and I saw a lot of that even on CNN.
Well, the opposite was MSNBC. I don't know if you saw the clip.
I didn't see MSNBC.
Rachel Maddow was going on Twitter,
she went ballistic.
Was going ballistic about how
I don't really watch MSNBC.
Yeah. Well, nobody watches MSNBC, so I think that's probably the only saving grace about it. But let's just talk personally a little bit. What was it like? You're really a Miami guy. You're really a Miami guy through and through. Yeah. And suddenly you put yourself in that national stage. We spoke about it before you did it, but then doing it is different, right? Traveling to these states as a Miami guy, telling your Miami story. Yeah. What was that like from a personal perspective?
I mean, a few things. One, it's incredible to live in a country where you can do it. I think where a kid, whose parents were not born here, has an opportunity to lead the country in such a pivotal moment. Number two, it's hard. If you think being the mayor of a big city is hard, which it is, by the way, running for president is hard. I remember one moment where my mother and I were talking on the phone and she said, "How are you doing?" And it dawned on me in that moment, because you get so caught up in executing, right? You get so caught up in like, this is my plan. This is what I have to do to succeed and to get to the next stage or whatever, that sometimes you don't really reminisce on the enormity of what you're doing, right? And it sort of dawned on me in that moment, I'm running for the most important job in the world, right? And the most, contentious job in the world. And sort of, and I'm one of 10 people, 11 people in my party, right, that is doing it. And it sort of highlighted the enormity of it. Number three, look, I don't think the people who are watching this have a hard time believing that there's a bunch of agendas, right? It's not necessarily the agenda of some that my candidacy got legs, right? If it were, I would have gotten an equal opportunity to do X, Y, or Z. I wouldn't have had people trying to ambush me in interviews and trying to make me seem like I wasn't ready for prime time or whatever. Those are things that happen. They happen to every candidate.
Yeah, you almost have to expect them for
you have to
job.
expect them, and I think you experience teaches you, like, hey, put your mouthpiece on, always have it on, because you never know, even at the end of a 20-minute interview that's gone super well, like that somebody might throw a punch at you unexpectedly.
It's always that last question.
It was the last question. But yeah, again, those are all teaching moments. And then for me, Miami has always been a place where the mayor's position has been a limiting thing, right? And I think for me, there was a huge sense of pride to be able to say, wait a second, being the mayor of a big city or being the mayor of Miami, it shouldn't be a ceiling. It shouldn't be a limit. It should be something that we can take and use as a model to prove that our country is great, that our system of government works, that our democracy works, that our constitutional republic works, that capitalism works, right? And that, the fact that we were exiled from our country of birth, which is part of our narrative, is something that is a strength, not a weakness for us.
Yeah, in Miami, that's so much part of me. My family came from Argentina during the Dirty War in the 70s. They came to Miami, I was born here. And so many of us have that in our backgrounds. But somehow, when I leave Miami and I go to different places, especially in the Midwest and such, there's a different perception of Miami, right? We have the perception of, like, University of Miami for years was called Suntan U, right? This is a place you go for vacation or to retire. Obviously, you gave some of the stats that's real, right? You feel the new jobs and the new energy behind Miami. But did you find that the average American had a different view of Miami, or was still sort of struggling with that old view of you're a fit guy, suntan and everything? How did that narrative
What I saw is, obviously, when you're young, it's tough. When you're not a governor, it's also tough. In other words, it's been tough for our governor. He's a governor, right? It's tough even tougher when you're a mayor, right? Like, and it's just never happened before. It's unprecedented. A mayor is never in the United States ascended to the presidency. So I was very aware of the fact that I was trying to do something that had never been done before. Obviously, you have examples of people that did better than others. But when you're not a senator, when you're not a governor, and you're a mayor, you have even a steeper mountain to climb. And my view was, look, I confronted a fiscal cliff when I got to City Hall. It was actually a 20% out of balance, which is exactly how out of balance the federal government is in terms of revenue versus expenses. And the courage that it takes to make tough choices doesn't depend on the number of zeros. Right? You either have it or you don't have it. The ability to make tough decisions is not based on the scale of those decisions. It's, you just have to make tough decisions sometimes. So that was sort of my argument. But again, you just, for me, I needed volume. I think some people needed a different personality. I probably needed a lot more volume, and I didn't get the volume. And some people have the volume, but maybe don't have the right personality, and that's what voters have to decide.
Right. And of course, working with legislatures and different jobs give you different roles. It's interesting. Traditionally, many presidents ascend from the legislature, Senate, and Congress, which I actually think is a terrible starting point. Being a governor, at least you have
executive
more
experience,
like being a mayor, but you have executive experience of working with the legislature. So tell me a little bit about Miami. After the race, you came out. We spoke after you suspended your candidacy, and I've seen you really just dive back into the job of being mayor of Miami. So what's that been like? So you were traveling all over the country. Yeah. People criticize you're away, et cetera, whatever. They're always criticizing. Yeah. But you were away a bunch. Now you're here and you're seen everywhere now. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that, how that transition.
I think people forget that I didn't just run for president for almost 3 months, but that I was president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors for a year and a half. And the U.S. Conference of Mayors typically is a 1-year office. You hold the office for a year. In my case, it was a year and a half because my predecessor had resigned to run for governor of Ohio. So it was unusually long. And so the combination of those two things sort of bookend, right, made for me being away a lot. Without a doubt. And so there was, I think, people that were not happy about that. And honestly, when I came back after running, it just, for me, it was natural. Like, okay, do your job. It's time to do your job, right? You're still mayor. You're mayor for another 2 years. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of time to leave things done. We've accomplished a lot. There's a lot more to be accomplished, and just do you. You know, life isn't always a series of successes, right? I remember, you know, getting elected by 85% and almost immediately within the first year losing the strong mayor by 65%. So, you know, on the one hand, I came in with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and I was humbled very, very quickly, right? Then I get reelected by close to 80%. And later on, you know, become president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, run for president of the United States. And it was a humbling experience. I was one of the first people to drop out, if not the first person to drop out of the race. So, you know, that's not the way I would have liked to have seen it, or, you know, it ended. Obviously, I would have liked to have won, right? That was you run because, and I guarantee you, I'm almost certain to say that every single person who's run, I feel pretty confident saying that they saw a path to victory, to winning. It wasn't a parlay. Right, for anybody.
Except maybe Vivek.
I don't even think for Vivek. I really think it wasn't a parlay. And I'll be honest with you, I think there was a moment where he had a tremendous amount of momentum. And then I think he got into some foreign policy issues that made people concerned, you know, and I
the Jewish community, once he let his stance on Israel known, he tried to hide it behind.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was like three things. It was Israel, it was Taiwan, and it was Russia and Ukraine, right, in succession. And I think again, he was riding high. He had a lot of momentum, and then, you know, sometimes. You know, that all gets the better of you. And we're all susceptible to that. I'm not trying to be critical of him. I spoke to him a couple of times throughout that process and gave him my 2 cents on what I felt were his pronouncements, or where I thought that maybe, and he was very open to it. I got to say, he was super open. He was like, look, this is why, you know, I would love for you to support me, you know, because I'd love to have you as a sounding board. And, you know, he was, you know, but I don't think he was parlaying it. I think, you know, whether some would argue that he has been strategic in not criticizing Trump or being kind of pro-Trump as a means to position himself, that part, you know, I could see that. But I don't think he ran with that expectation. I mean, he's a smart guy. He has, you know, in the sense that he has tremendous credentials. He's done well in business. He's probably succeeded at just about everything he's done in his life. And this is a monster that even the people who are super highly successful, it's a Himalaya. You know,
a lot of factors you can't control. I got to meet him and his wife in Iowa this summer at a dinner, just for a few moments. And his wife is very impressive. I mean, really. She
does. She seems very impressive. And it was tough. I mean, you know, look, you know, to see her crying last night, you know, when he had to, it was tough. It's tough to watch, you know what I mean? Because, you know, the family is invested emotionally, you know, they have small kids just like I do. And, you know, it's tough. It's tough to watch.
Well, we all have families, and people on the outside see the public face and don't really see that. But I'm sure that
we get dehumanized at some level. I'll be fine. We get dehumanized. And I think that's one of the tragedies of modern day politics, is that people forget that we're all human beings, and that we all, you know, read stuff. We all, you know, and we're in this hyper, you know, like you said, blogified world where there's, you know, it's impossible. You know, I always tell my wife, you got to give me compliments because I get plenty of criticisms, yes. You know, so you don't have to worry about me getting a big head.
With elected officials, it's interesting in the public and people who listen to podcasts, a lot of people who are into politics and that listens to shows like this. There's a danger. They look at elected officials, at politicians, either as the best thing since sliced bread or the devil reincarnated. Yeah. And usually if you think either of those things, you know, you have to reevaluate a little bit, because people will come to me, you know, I'm a supporter of DeSantis, and people say, well, what about this policy? And I say, I don't agree with that policy. And I say, how do you support him? I'm like, you expect me to agree with every policy position the guy has? I don't. Sure. I don't agree with myself 100% of the time. How am I going to agree with somebody else? And it's the same with the contrary. I mean, you could take a president like Biden, who has not been a good president, has done a lot of bad things for the country. Is he the devil reincarnated? No. Is our country going to be okay after Biden? Yes. You see it all over the world. Every time someone doesn't like a president in particular, it's a challenge to our democracy. It's, you know, it's the world is ending, and it's not the case. We have to really believe here in America. We have to believe in the systems that our founders put in place.
No doubt. And I think, but we have entered into an era of hypertoxicity. You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the worries that I have as someone who's been in public service now for 15 years. I do see a level of toxicity that worries me. I see a lack of accountability in people who are disseminating information. That also worries me, because we want to have a robust freedom of speech. We want to have a robust free press, but where's the accountability, right? And I think that part is frustrating, particularly for public officials who care about their reputation, right? And I grew up in an era in the 80s when, a public servant was supposed to be someone you emulated, you admired, right? You looked up to. And we've lost that a little bit in terms of like now dissolving into like they're just combatants. It's just combat, and it's us against the press, or it's us against each other, or it's us against the blogosphere world or whatever, or bloggers. And I think that is dangerous. I think that our enemies want that. They're exploiting that. Let's call it weakness. They're exacerbating it and using, trolls and artificial intelligence, in my opinion, to push narratives and to try to brainwash people. And that's my view of it. And it's scary, but I think part of the reason why I ran, and I think part of the reason why some of the other candidates have run, is because there's always hope in the next generation. Right? There's always hope in the next generation. And I'm a fairly young guy. I was a first in my generation mayor, right? And there will be a first in my generation president, whoever that is. And it's inevitable, by the way. And I would say 90% chance it will be in 2028. Sure. Right, 90% chance. Also,
because I think the country is going to be sick of seeing guys in their 80s running.
Well, I mean, it's just inevitable, right? Like chronologically, it's just there's an inevitability, mathematically. So I think the 2028 election will be a next generation election, no matter how you look at it, and usually that has a tendency to bring out the best and the brightest in a generation, and that excites me about the country and about a revival of our democracy and a revival about the national conversation over the national contract, which is how we govern ourselves, right? And how and what our vision is for the country.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about accountability on the news, that's really the most important right now today, because there's so much news that's out there. The New York Times can publish something on the front page, top fold, that's false. And then a week later, after getting a letter from a lawyer, we'll put on page 25 on the bottom in small print, the correction.
It's unbelievable. And then the worst part is, you, as a public official, it seems like you're only left with two options. You can either be sort of like Donald Trump and just go straight on in attack mode, or you can try to say like, hey, look, this is not right. And then you're going to be criticized for, you can't take it. You can't take the heat. You can't take the criticism. You're just, or you're anti First Amendment, or you're anti free press. And no, it's got nothing to do with that. It has entirely to do with the fact that I'm entitled, just like any other public official, to the sanctity of my reputation, so long as I maintain it. And, the press will often take a set of facts and they will apply them improperly, or do a variety of other things, right?
But the reason why it's dangerous is because if you think about the comment you said earlier about our generation going to be next for president, it's true. I mean, someone in their 40s or 50s will be next. That's how it goes. But you're saying it's going to bring out the best and the brightest, but the environment today
that's
makes
the concern.
It so hard to put yourself out there.
That's the concern. And it's interesting. We talked about me being a working mayor. I have very extensive disclosures that I have to follow, which I always do. And a lot of articles criticizing, what I do and how I do it are just based on my disclosures. And, but then they say, oh, well, you didn't disclose it on one form, which I wasn't required to disclose it on. And you did disclose another form, which I was required to disclose it on. Why not just say, look, the guy followed the law, but instead they try to make the perception that, I was hiding something on one. It's really silly, and it's unfortunate.
But it affects your life.
Of course it does.
Anyone's life.
Of course. And it tries to create a narrative and a perception about who you are. And again, you're limited in your abilities to respond, and it's sad.
Yeah, so there's three types of worlds I think that you operate in publicly. One is the national space. The other is social media. You have your own podcast, you're big, you have your thing. And then you have Miami, what you do here in Miami. And they're all really different things, especially Miami. So if you look nationally, there's all these questions, running, not running. You're public. I was with you, I remember once in a conference in Israel, and you were the first person I saw with the Snapchat glasses. The Snapchat glasses walking around a conference. And you're always at the forefront using technology.
Yeah.
On the streets of Miami, though, you're immensely popular. I mean, you walk the streets, you do a lot of things for people. You have lots of good relationships, not just with influencers and strong people in the community, but just everyday people in the community, older folks that you visit on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
Tell me now, just let's transition into your local mayor, Francis Suarez. You know, what are you trying to get done this year? What are you excited about for the city of Miami?
Well, I think first of all, we just had Martin Luther King Day, and you know, being at the 5,000 Role Model Breakfast was inspiring. You know, to see that program thriving. You know, being in Liberty City and seeing the work that's being done in that community, and then walking the parade and having so many people hug you and be excited about your leadership and being present in the community, it reminds you why you do the job. I think for us, every year I try to shift the focus a little bit depending on a variety of things. Some of the themes that I'm thinking about now are homelessness, you know, housing and homicides, right? What I call the 3 H's. And so we want to build on our success in homicides and in violent crime, which is an incredible story, and see if we can get to the lowest number in recorded history. The lowest number in recorded history was 24. We were at the lower than the 1947 number last year.
How are you going to do it?
Well, we're going to continue to fund our department. We're going to continue to support them. We're going to continue to articulate the expectation. And I think, you know, that's how we've set the stage, right? Obviously, the economy is important because we have 1.6% unemployment. We have the lowest unemployment in America. Wow. And I think if people are working, right, we're also ranked the happiest city in America and the healthiest city in America. So if people are working, they're happy, they're healthy, they're likely not committing violent crime. And so those are qualitative factors that we want to continue to work on at a macro level to make sure that we're not doing anything to make our officers' jobs more difficult, right? So that's one. On homelessness, we went down from 640 to I think 534 year over year.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and
especially when you compare it to any other big city in America.
And we want to be the first major city in America to be at what we call functional zero, basically meaning zero homeless. We have some initiatives that we're going to announce in my State of the City now coming up in a few weeks, which we hope will help us get there. And then, you know, on housing, you know, we want to continue to supply housing. We believe that, you know, the best way to keep prices down is to, you know, deal with supply and continue to supply housing. But we also want to create affordable housing, and we do that in ways that are creative, right? We leverage every public dollar that we put in the city to the tune of $10 to $20 in the capital stack, whether it's financing some state program or federal program that's run through the state, or you know, or land grants, right? So we're getting a great leverage rate on our invested dollar, and we want to continue to do that. It's transformed some of our neighborhoods. I do think that's also part of why our homicide rate has gone down, because, for example, in Overtown, as a CRA board member, I was one of our board members that invested $60 million in that community in projects that were probably worth, you know, close to $1 billion, right? So when you put $1 billion in a community, you transform the community, right? It was a food desert. There were no supermarkets in Overtown. Now there's a Choice, which we funded. So, and you're seeing now Block 55 be developed, which was kind of a donut hole right next to I-95. So I think it's exciting for me to be able to do my job. I certainly want to work on cultural facilities. Like we hope somebody steps up and wants to renovate the Marine Stadium and take it over as an operational thing.
People don't know the Marine Stadium is this
it's a jewel,
incredible stadium that's facing the water.
It's a jewel
in Key Biscayne,
and it's on the National Historic Registry. Hopefully, the Playhouse in the Grove will get started.
That's a long story.
It's a long story, probably good for another podcast. And then the Guzman Theater. We want to make sure that the Guzman Theater. So those are 3 cultural facilities we love to see going. I'd love to be able to do a new police station for our police officers. Probably the oldest building in our entire portfolio, or one of the oldest, is the police department. And I believe that quality of life for employees is not just pay, which I think is important. And we hope to have labor peace over the next couple of months with all three of our unions that are left. But it's also quality of life and where you work. right? And so we want to have a state-of-the-art police department. We already have a brand new MRC that is being built where our soccer stadium will be. I want to be able to cut the ribbon on that soccer stadium.
That's exciting. You have my guy Messi as an Argentinian.
We got Messi. We just got Luis Suarez, Alba, Busquets. So it's kind of like an all-star team that they're putting together. It's really fun to watch. But it'll be great when they start in Miami. It's a 60-acre park, 20 acres of ball fields, and the city's putting in $0, right? $0. They're paying $50 million to remediate the land. $20 million for us to fix up the park. And they're giving us an annual rent of $10 million a year on the low end, right, as a base rate, when we're making $250,000 on that property on an annual basis on a good year.
Yeah, and it's an area that can use some extra development as well.
It is, and it's going to have commercial. It'll have a plaza, hopefully restaurants, so that the residents who live in the surrounding area now have a park and a place where they can walk to, and like a paseo where they can walk to and have dinner.
So one thing we speak about a lot, we can end on this, is fitness. Fitness is a big thing for you. You have a Miami Fitness Challenge. You do workouts online. I've worked out with you before. I don't know if I can hang all the time, but you do start your day with cold plunges, which so do I. How's that?
I find it to be an exhilarating way to wake up. There's all kinds of, if you do a lot of research on it, there's all kinds of physiological benefits. I think the most important of which is doing something you don't want to do. I
also find it just clears your head. Anything you've got going on in your head is gone after 3 minutes.
It does. It wakes you up in a way that nothing that I know has ever, woken me up. Not coffee, not even great sleep, right? Like, so it wakes you up in a way that's, but I also find that, like, for me, and I've seen some chatter on this on social media, just doing something that you don't want to do. It's a daily, I don't know how it is for you, but for me, it is a daily fight. I don't want to go in it. You know what I mean? I abhor the cold. I'm not a cold guy. I don't like the cold. So for me, it is a struggle. But once I get in.
I don't have that. For me,
I do.
It was hard in the beginning. I love it. But here's my question. Do you go in before or after you lift? Supposedly, you're not supposed to go in after you lift.
It's supposed to be before.
I do it after. I feel so much better.
So I've done it both ways, before and after. I like to try to do it before if I can. But I've done it after, and it feels great when you do it after.
Yeah. Well, anyways, thank you so much for being here,
brother.
Francis.
Good
Mayor Suarez, it's really amazing to have you here on the podcast.
Good to be with
Episode
you,
number 2 of many.
I love that.
Thank you so much here in your city.
Thanks,
Guys,
Gabe.
Please be sure to like and subscribe and share the podcast with your friends. And thanks for being here.